So I teach U.S.-Mexico relations. My background is that my senior thesis is about narco-trafficking as a form of terrorism with specific relations to women's involvement in it. So the U.S.-Mexico relations side of everything is always ambiguous because there's some shit we say we do, and there's some shit that people say we do, and we say no. I tend to believe the people that say we are corrupt bastards, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we get into it, this is not like the overarching way in which U.S.-Mexico relations are broken down, but this is a very, very good way of looking at them. As you understand, in the 1960s, we had things like Rivera programs. We weren't just like, oh, you try to cross our border, you must be a terrorist who's infiltrating us, who's going to make me eat bean and cheese burritos for lunch every day, right? We saw them as part of economic integration, and it's probably a reason as to why this happened, right? We passed NAFTA in '94. That dramatically changes the landscape for everything, not only in the United States, not only in Canada, but also in Mexico, because there's a fuck ton of rules and a lot of things that happen which ultimately start causing some of the larger problems. If you're a critique debater and you are debating a U.S.-Mexico relations topic and you are not talking about NAFTA, you have fucked up terribly. Because NAFTA pretty much dictated the way in which foreign policy has happened since 1994. So what is NAFTA? NAFTA is an agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States where we will gradually reduce tariffs. This gradualness happened from 1994, and the last reduction ultimately ended in 2008. Because of NAFTA, trade between Mexico and the United States went from $290 billion in '93 to $1.1 trillion in 2012. Mexico as a country and their different corporations, things like that, has overall become the 7th largest investment of the United States. However, the discrepancies between the incomes and the wealth of the United States and the wealth of Mexico is the largest between two neighboring countries in the world. So think about that. There are no other countries that neighbor each other where people are drastically and economically at different ends of the spectrum than U.S. and Mexico. So when you're talking about these relations, you have to understand that there is a huge power dynamic at play where one country is dramatically leading the other, has more resources than the other, is more organized than the other, and therefore that creates some problems. Mexico exports 3rd largest oil export to the United States. They also send things like car parts, televisions, clothes, a lot of other things, but their major thing is oil. So what are the problems with NAFTA? Kind of what I've alluded to. A report that came out by the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, in 2003 showed that our trade increases with Mexico were already on the rise before NAFTA, which means that there is no freaking way to know what NAFTA did. Many economic scholars are like, yeah, help things got better, but we really don't know if that's NAFTA per se, or if that was just an economic trend that was going to happen between the 1990s and the 2000s because of things. Honestly, it's a combination of both, right? Mexico had some long-standing programs before NAFTA that were a leading economic driver for them that ultimately disappeared after NAFTA. The biggest one that you will hear is that of the Ejido program. Ejido is basically a program of communal farming. So what would happen before in Mexico would be, let's just take us four here. We are different landowners, but to work the land, to get the seed, to get all the fertilizer, to do all that stuff, we're too broke if you were to split the land in 4 and then just give me my chunk. That does not work economically. We all have to invest together and work the land together, and then we split the profits. Well, NAFTA made that process illegal. It said that we couldn't communally own land, that you had to individually own plots, and what that ended up doing for the farmers is that it was so unsustainable to farm that land that they ended up having to put their plots of land for sale, at which point corporations came in and were like, you're desperate? Great, we want your land, it's going to come for cheap, you might not starve for the next 2 years, but guess what, you are not a better off situation. If you research the statistics on this, you'll see that there was a little over 2.3 million jobs in agriculture pre-NAFTA, And Bill Clinton, you know, probably smoked a joint on top of the White House and then would go to his press conferences and say things like, oh, NAFTA's going to create all these jobs. You don't understand. Industry is the way of the future. And so we must create more factory jobs for these people so that they have more work and more things to do. The problem was only about 700,000 jobs were created because of NAFTA and things like maquiladoras. Maquiladora is a Spanish word basically for a factory. And so there was over 1 million jobs of people who had nothing to do because they could not afford to farm, but there was not a job for them in a factory. Now that is a huge problem, but it is not where the problem lied. Most of the critical literature, obviously most of you know I run critiques, so I research U.S.-Mexico relations on a very critical basis, say that the problem is not so much that we lose all these jobs, but the way in which NAFTA transforms society. You got to understand, Ciudad Juarez, which is right by our border, had no infrastructure to deal with this move. Did not have roads, did not have hospitals, did not have schools, they didn't have giant apartment complexes coming in and being like, we want to invest so that people live there. They had their city, but because of this program, all these millions of farmers had to flood into the city looking for work. That drastically destabilized the police department's ability to enforce anything, the ability for organized crime to remain at a low, because you had a bunch of desperate people looking for money with no alternatives in a small-ass town. What are some of the effects of that? Femicide is the first real large effect of that. There are hundreds of thousands of women, or not hundreds of thousands, there are thousands of women who have gone missing because of this, and when they are found, they usually have been brutally raped. They have been thrown in giant piles of burial sites where you'll find 10 or 12 women together. And when you go to the police department about these issues, the police's first response is usually to ask some stupid question like, what were they wearing and where were they? Right? There is no accountability in places like Juarez if you are a woman and you are sexually assaulted because there is now 1 million extra people in a place with no infrastructure. Okay? The cops don't handle that shit. And so that is the situation that Mexico, specifically our border towns, are in, or were in. Not as bad anymore, still a big problem. But early 2000s, late 90s, huge problem. So you got to understand that although the Mexican government may be weak, they may be corrupt, they may be disorganized, they have some lingering issues that has a lot to do with, we may look good on paper that we have more income and we're exporting more, but that doesn't necessarily mean all of our people are benefiting from that. Questions before I leave NAFTA? Nope. Merida Initiative. Merida Initiative, aka Plan Mexico, was defined new security operation initiative between the United States and Mexico to control gun trafficking. The policy officially is over. Officially, it is over. It was a time frame, I believe, to like 2010. But, you know, Hill Dog came out and was like, well, Merida 1.0 didn't really work, so we got to do Merida 2.0. And so because of that, the president has asked for extensions. I found warrants up to through 2012 where we keep extending money to Mexico for these initiatives. Essentially, the initiatives are like, some of the things we do are we train cops there. We send more of our enforcement to the northern parts in some instances. But the biggest complaint by a lot of people was how we do it, right? So before, there used to be this thing called the School of the Americas. It is no longer called that. If somebody could enlighten me as to what it's called. Now, look up School of the Americas. You'll find the new name. But essentially, the School of the Americas is the training facility that the United States uses to train pretty much different Latin American countries and Latin American organizations. For example, Colombia, School of the Americas, right? Chile, School of the Americas. And, well, why the fuck are they so bad, Brendan? Like, yeah, we train them to do CIA SEAL Team 6 shit, like, big deal. Hegemony, like, solves that problem, right? Not quite. Some of the things that they do, like, in their books of training how to go and take over things, it is like, you are to kill the priest and rape the women. So that you set an ontological standard of what is and what is not, who has and who does not have control. And so because of that, this thing has been pretty much seen as like not a successful program. Obviously, we still have gun trafficking problems. We still have immigration problems. But there hasn't been another Merida initiative type movement, right? The U.S. and Mexico relations side of things have not come together to be like, here's this another plan that we're going to try the second time. Still not quite there.
So Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation is what they're.
Can you repeat that again louder?
The Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation.
Same shit, School of the Americas, they just move locations and change the name. Flaws of Merida Initiative. There are currently 50 million people living in poverty in Mexico. Consider that. Right? When you are living in poverty and you have no real options, we said there's about 1 million jobs lost in one city alone, it makes it so that you only have certain options. Migration, shitty jobs that might not pay you well, or to work for the cartel. Right? The Merida Initiative trains troops, they train law enforcement. This isn't a public welfare program. This isn't build schools so that people get education so they might not have to work for the cartels. This isn't create new infrastructure and new economies. This is simply, we're going to go mano y mano, masculinity on masculinity. We have bigger guns. We got more guns. We're going to stop you. That's not working because the problems of drug trade in Mexico are heavily related to the social aspects, a lot of money, a lot of poverty. And so that's one of the bigger things. The second thing, though, this is super important. The cartels, 90% of the guns that they use come from America. And I'm not talking about just, we bought stocks in Tennessee, and we bought, like, the barrel and another. No, full bought guns legitimately. If you track the Mexican guns, 90% of them are in the United States. We do not have a good solution to this. We do not have a good solution to pretty much taking the muscle away from these people. And it goes beyond guns, right? They have anti-tank technology, they have anti-air technology, they have technology so that they can't get messed up if we take ships on shore, they have rocket launchers, they have radar and sonar, they got all this mad equipment, and so we only continue to perpetuate this problem. We do not address this. That kind of leads me to this. You need to know about Operation Fast and the Furious. You need to know about this. It was an extension of something called Operation Gun Runner. The way that the program worked, it was through the ATF, and essentially the ATF was like, look, we're going to get these guns, and we're going to let people buy them from us. And when they buy them from us, they're going to go on like this suspicious list, right? Where now you are a person of suspicion list in attempts to try and track the weapons, try and figure out where this like chain is going. That just sounds like a terrible fucking idea. Like, I don't know why somebody wasn't just like, time out. Okay. Retrospect, right? There's no way to track how much the cartel makes. Low estimates put them in the Google range. 38, 42, 47 billion a year. Low estimates. So, you're going against Google, and you're going to try and trick Google into taking guns and giving you their location. Like, you don't make $36 billion a year because people are really addicted to drugs. You make $36 billion a year because you are an efficient organization that is organized. And that is what the cartel is. These are not gangsters. Okay, you cannot turn on Casino or Goodfellas and think that they operate in that manner. Think about it as CEOs who want to make more money in Mexico than they possibly could in any other organization. You go work for the cartel. So they are terribly organized, right? For example, we lost hundreds of weapons here. The reason why we canceled the program in 2011 is because 2 Border Patrol agents in Arizona were shot, and the guns that were left around there were ones that we lost in this operation. So we had whistleblowers then release that this shit was happening. You get the head of the ATF at the time who was found in contempt by a judge, and then President Obama had to come and rescue his whole ass by saying, time out, Judge, you can't ask for those documents. I'm the president. I want them. Your order of contempt no longer matters. So we don't have a clear resolved issue as how, like, what this has done. There is not an internal review board, thing that you could turn to, or some sort of document that shows, a study that shows the effects of this, we just continue to make enormous fuck-ups in the way in which we go about this. And again, if you're a critique debater, it is the mentality that states that because the cartels use guns, because they are violent, if you are more violent, you will win. That is not an effective strategy against a business. Yes, they use terrorist methodologies. Yes, they are terrorists, but they operate like a business, right? They have offshore accounts. They grow poppy in Afghanistan. They are supplying China with the drugs that China cannot produce in China, so the Sinaloa cartel and Mexican cartels are shipping drugs to China to try and fill the vacuum for China's increase in drug usage. They are in Australia controlling cocaine trafficking routes, right? They had a billion-dollar industry in the city of Chicago. The reason why Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who was the leader, or technically kind of still is, but he's in jail, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, there's a reason why he was the first public enemy #1 since Al Capone, right? It's because he says shit like, don't trip, we have $1 billion heroin market already lined up if weed fails. This is a business, and that is the first thing you need to understand about U.S.-Mexico relations, is that the third party of the cartels operates more like a government than sometimes Mexico does. When their leaders get ousted and put in jail or killed, they are faster at replacing those people than almost any other political system in the world. So it is not like, for those of you who use that fancy Hydra shit argument, that's the cartel. Okay, you knock one off, they've trained 4 or 5 people to do that same job. And just because you put them in jail, they're sitting in the Mexican Hilton. Questions? Immigration. Hot topic this year in debate. Problem. Not a Mexican issue. Why? President Bush signed and I can't remember the name of this shit. You go to, not Colbert, but Jon Stewart did an amazing little skit, if you look up his immigration thing, where he goes over the bill that was signed by President Bush that says if children from a non-neighboring country are detained at the border, they cannot be deported. That is a Republican 100% bill. President.
Is it all the way up to 18, or was it stop at 15 or 16?
I think it stops at 15 or 16. I don't think it's our legal definition of a minor, but nonetheless, Mexican kids get caught, there's a huge debate, just send their ass back.
Yeah.
Right? So the Mexican government is not entirely incentivized to be like, this is our fucking problem. This is the Guatemalan problem. The Honduran problem. This is the Chilean problem. These are problems of United States having policies in Latin America that have destabilized those political systems and those economies, and the generations there see no future, so they come to America. Right? Go turn on C-SPAN. America is the greatest country in the world. We offer the best education. We have the best markets, the most jobs. If you're a 5-year-old sitting in the middle of a war-torn region, America sounds pretty good. An American jail sounds pretty good. Right? And so, it's partly our policies in Latin America. It is partly our drug policy. Who's the #1 consumer of all the drugs grown in Colombia, in Sinaloa, in Peru, in Chile? United States citizens. Right? Who does more recreational drugs than any of us in the world? U.S. citizens. Right? We are consumers. We are the market. And so, for as much as we can try to stop the source, it's not going to stop, the kids in all public or in private upper-level universities from trying to get their fix. And so when we continue to make policies, when we continue to externalize the problem, that's how we get there. Where Mexico does influence this discussion is this Migratory Act. So Mexico, in their history, before the Migratory Act, if you were in South America, Latin America, and you wanted to come to the United States through Mexico, the southern Mexican border was ridiculous. It was it was the Republican dream. It was militarized. You crossed and got caught. They were like, we'll give you up to 10 years of jail. We don't give a shit. We will beat you. We will throw you back to your own damn country. Ruthless. Like, I swear to God, Republicans must have spent some time there before this bill and were like, that's the plan. That is how we do it. Granted, we have 2,000 miles and not like 200, but that's the plan. And so they passed the Migratory Act. Essentially, the Migratory Act did a few things that are really, really, really important. First is it looked at humanitarian crises and families as one of the reasons why you should be granted access to Mexico. So if you're like, hey, I'm 12, my mom is in Juarez right now, which is really close to the American border, and she's hustling and she's working, and I'm just trying to get to my mom, Mexican government now is a lot more lenient for being like, cool. Second part of that, though, is that they mainstream the visa process. Something America still doesn't know how to do, right? Mexico is just like, we can't do it anymore. Like, there's a lot of fucking people trying to come. We can't just keep arming our borders, so we mainstream visa processes. Might as well give them documentation. But the most important is this. The punishment used to be up to 10 years in jail. The punishment now is 5,000 pesos, under 500 American bucks. If you have a family in America coming up with 500 bucks, if you did get caught by Mexican officials, it's not that bad. Right? And so we have a looser southern Mexican border that has allowed for a lot more transportation and immigration. And that's the one part of the puzzle piece that does not get talked about. Y'all are debaters. Go to Mother Jones. Go to the Huffington Post. You'll read plenty of policies in Latin America that have messed things up. What they won't tell you is that because of this, people have been able to travel more.
What year is Migratory Act put into law?
10? 10 or 11?
Very recent.
Yeah. Oh no, super recently.
I actually have the same question.
Yeah. It was like 2010, 2011, something like that.
I'm a little confused. Is that Mexico's policy towards people from Latin American countries that
Yeah.
are coming up through
Yeah.
Mexico? So that doesn't have anything to do with the U.S.
Nope.
border? It's a-
So children migrate to Mexico, and then so they have this act, right? And then if they come to the United States and caught at the border, they're automatically granted citizenship because they're not Mexican citizens?
No. Children understand that it is easier to immigrate through Mexico than ever before. So they'll risk immigrating, even if they don't get a visa, right? This isn't the part that scared a lot of people. Not a lot of people are like, yeah, Mexico, give me a visa. Like if you're Yasiel Puig and you're trying to play in the Mexican baseball league, or the MLB, yeah, maybe you go to Mexico and you get a visa, so that way you're not have to go through the draft and you can be a free agent. But outside of that, most people were just kind of on this way, right? They're like, oh shit, I don't have to go to jail. Even if I get caught, they'll deport me and I'll pay them 500 bucks. Which is like a standard payout for most Mexican cops anyways, right? If you've ever been to TJ and you were a little too drunk driving your car, if you had a couple hundos, you're fine. So, Mexican government at its finest? I don't know what to tell you there. But yeah, so children cross through Mexico and then have to cross our deserts. So it's not like you get to this part and then you could just go and straight into America. You have to still cross into America. But getting through Mexico was a lot harder than getting through the United States. At least for people south of Mexico. Questions? My favorite. Your dissent, your criticisms, your everything should always, if you're related to Mexico, talk about cartels. To talk about what power these cartels have. Cartels. Some interesting things that you might want to do some research on. The United States has been accused of working with the cartels. The place where they were accused is a criminal court case in Chicago, in which this man, Vicente Zambada Niebla, was caught with 36 other people, and his official statement was, I was told that I could traffic drugs in and traffic weapons out without repercussions as an informal agreement. That is his official statement. We've had these conversations, we're cool. There's another dude, and I tried 20 minutes, I could not find it. But, well, let's go to the second one. The capture of El Chapo Joaquin Guzman. You should know who he is. He is the richest cartel member probably to ever exist. He's also probably the most powerful cartel member to ever exist. He literally radically revolutionized the way in which cartels operate. And he's not a rich guy, he's not educated, he's a podunk farmer from the middle of Sinaloa who at like the age of 8 was like, fuck this, we're poor, and I got a bunch of fertile ass land behind me that can grow some amazing poppy. When he was caught by the Mexican government, you know what his defense is? I'm just a farmer. I make 40,000 pesos a year. I don't know who the fuck this Chapo guy is, but it ain't me. So, the link is that this guy was allowed to traffic this guy's drugs, okay approval from the United States. There's also another one that in the late 90s, the third in command for El Chapo was actually stopped by Chicago PD and was released. And his official statement was, I was released so that I could be the direct contact between the United States government and El Chapo Guzman. I could be talking to these two people. Now, why the fuck would the United States want this, right? Like, really? Let's contemplate this. One, what do you think would happen if we just like put a plug on the amount of drugs that came to the United States? Drug prices skyrocket. You no longer have to carry a 9 to move a kilo. You probably have to carry an AK-47 to move a kilo, right? Middle of Chi-Town, somebody tries to rob you for your kilo. That looks more like a block warfare as opposed to 5 guys shooting 1, right? So there's a lot of good reasons why you wouldn't just want to put a plug on drug trafficking. But there is also a lot of good reasons why you would want to have one dominant cartel, the Sinaloa cartel, over a lot of little ones. And so the theory that has been presented by several different people in IR is that the United States did this as a way to flush out other cartels. They would target other cartels at the border and then give the Sinaloa cartel special privileges so that they would gain more control of Mexico, and by extension it would be less violent. If you got one dominant group, a lot of little groups won't fight for those routes. And that's probably the most important thing about cartel politics, right? Is that there are routes. There are areas that cartels control to try and go through. It's not like they all just kind of have their own collective groups and then kind of get north to the border and then figure it out from there. No, they own that territory. That is their territory, and each cartel has their own territory. The last thing is this conflict between rural development and drug trafficking that Mexico has. Why do you think it took Chapo Guzman escaped from a prison? He got sentenced for like 20 years, 2 years into it, paid about $2.7 million is the projected amount, and just like got in the laundry hamper, guard wheeled him out, and escaped prison, clean. That's how he got out, $2.7 million. Well, if that's how much he paid to get out, what he does in his towns, where he hides, is he'll build schools. He builds hospitals. There are certain poor people that go to Chapo and say, hey, guess what? My kid's really fucking sick and I'm poor. I cannot afford the medicine. I cannot afford the treatment. What does Chapo do? I'll go to my hospital. It's free. I might come knocking at your door when I'm running. Right? And so there is a big conflict. Like, what do you do? If you eliminate the cartels, what happens to all the hospitals they built? What's happened to all the schools they built? What's happened to all the roads they've developed? What happens to all the people who work the farms and pick the poppy, that pick the weed, that pick the coca, that move the coca? These are all jobs. This is all a market. It's a business. You guys, some of you just came out of your econ lab. This is economics in Mexico. So you can't, it's not this whole gunslinger, this is the war on drugs, we're stuck in the 70s and 80s. It is now a full-fledged economy in Mexico. And if Mexico gets rid of this, that divide that we talked about earlier in the lecture, about how the United States and Mexico is the largest economic wealth divide of any two neighboring countries, can you imagine how ridiculous that would look if people weren't getting paid to traffic drugs? That is another thing that I think works excellently in your DSATs. Right? I think doing research about what schools and how many hospitals and specific areas where you know the government's not going to develop, right? Government doesn't like Oaxaca. They call them a bunch of Indians, and uncivilized people. Do you think they're going to develop Oaxaca and the rural areas of Oaxaca? No. Fuck no. What the hell does the PRI care about Oaxaca? They don't. And so these people offer an alternative. The land in Sinaloa is not getting any less fertile, right? And tomatoes don't make a profit like this. So, under the circumstances, under the way in which U.S. and Mexico relations through NAFTA have played out, we've created a situation. And so, if you are supposed to reduce drug trafficking on the app, maybe it's not a good idea to go guns blazing. Right? Maybe we pass a social justice policy. Maybe we pass a policy that increases hospitals. Because when people don't have to hide behind the cartel for financial purposes, those people lose spaces to run. Some background information as to how this guy was captured, which leads more to my theory that the U.S. is totally in on this. In 2013, the United States government went to the Mexican government and was like, yo, guess what? We found your boy. He's been hiding from you for about a decade. We know exactly where he is. Give us the green light. We'll send SEAL Team 6. We'll take him out. We'll bring him back to the United States. We have the most maximum security prisons. He ain't going nowhere. You want to know what the Mexican government said? Fuck you. Hell no. Hell no. You think America is just going to come into Mexico and capture El Chapo and we're not going to get fucking credit for this? No way. No way in hell. And so, theory. Again, these are all, unless Edward Snowden wants to spend an extended amount of time in here, it's going to be a hot minute before a whistleblower comes out of this. But theory, Mexican government and the crooked people in their government complex alerted El Chapo that the U.S. is really interested in him, and that they didn't have control over the United States invading Mexican airspace. And so, in a plight and a plan to gain more international legitimacy, they went and they got El Chapo. The way they did it is he has a compound in Culiacan. His compound, according to my aunt, who lives down the block, is these huge fucking gates with 1 foot direct metal that you need hardcore military rammers to get through, right? So I'm sure in this pleasant morning, because he was caught in jeans with no belt and a tucked in button up shirt, he hears the ramming, boom, boom, he's like, oh fuck. Then he's like, that's not American, they would have landed choppers. So he goes to his bathroom, there's an escape tunnel, he jumps in the escape tunnel, he goes through another escape house, pops out, a driver then takes him over to Michoacan, I think, and the driver gets caught. His escape driver gets caught, and I don't know how they got this out of him, but he told them where they were, so the cops show up to his nice little apartment complex where he's hanging out with his young wife, and surround the shit. Game over. Come in with guns, Chapo? Nuh-uh. I ain't running this time. Well, why wouldn't he do that? Right? How is it that one of the richest men in Mexico does not know what the fucking petty Mexican government is doing?
Because he does know.
Well, what's the first legal thing that Chapo files? Don't extradite me. We have non-extradition laws. All his lawyers, 3 fattest lawyers in Mexico, they're filing non-extradition cases right now. Because if he gets extradited to the United States, there's this beautiful thing called solitary. And he's most definitely going there. And so, it's about plugging the puzzle pieces, right? Because Chapo's gone, Sinaloa cartel's not hit. You kidding me? When he went to jail before, the guy who was running that thing is not running it now. So it's not like they have somebody who's inexperienced at the top of it, right? It's not like they're going to stand to lose more than a couple $2 billion. What the fuck is that to them? Basic operations of the cartel. I think that it's important for you to understand how they make their money in order for you to understand why we haven't been able to get them. So let's do some brief history. 1980s. We go after Escobar in Colombia. We were really fucking successful at that shit. That man got ousted. Why? Because there was this thing that was called Operation Kingpin Strategy. And so Operation Kingpin was essentially an operation where we were like, we're going to freeze your assets. It means the moment that you try and touch them, we pretty much triangulate your location, puts you on the run in a really awkward situation where you only have cash. They basically hunted them down. Problem with Chapo? That strategy of freezing assets hasn't necessarily worked out too well. 1994, gets charged with American Express. We charge American Express for doing dirty laundry for the Mexican cartel. Never once did we freeze his assets. 2008, HSBC gets charged again for laundering cartel money. Never once do we freeze the assets. And so we haven't frozen any assets from any of these people in Mexico. None of the cartel members lose their money in that way. We only did it to Colombia. Now, that's how Colombia ended. But why did Mexico get so powerful in relation to Colombia and the cartels? Well, when we first started, you gotta understand, this is long history, right? Mexico's been trafficking shit here since Prohibition. Like, some of the first weed here, Mexican. When we didn't allow alcohol, Mexicans were bringing it in, right? So, essentially, our long historical policies of the United States have very much influenced the culture and where Mexico supplies the shit we can't get. That's something that's been happening since before Prohibition. So, what happened was, in late 80s, Mexican cartels used to get paid like this. I'm going to give you 2 kilos, here's $200, I want it in Texas by Monday. Cool. Drive the kilos over, it's all good. Late 80s, the policy changes though. Colombian cartel realizes that's not very smart. At least not on their behalf. So what they say is, here's 2 kilos, 10% of that 2 kilos is yours. The profit you make from selling that 10% is your money. And so the proliferation of the cartel came as a response to how they did business with Colombia. And the reason why Colombia had to do that was because the United States was pretty effective in shutting down most transports that went through the Caribbean and into Florida. So before, when you could just fly a Cessna and put kilos inside the tires of the Cessna, that pretty much got shut down rather quickly in the 80s. And so they had to land transport. Well, you add that in combination with the fact that Mexican cartels now get paid in product and not cash, these Mexican cartels are highly incentivized to push the product. So they need manpower to do that, or people power, or woman power. And so because of that, these cartels just expanded in size because they literally needed to sell it to make their money. And that is the hiccup and the difference that has made this much more violent, that has made them much more powerful. They used to be like a trucking company almost, right? Only got to worry about the supply getting there. We already got paid, maybe a little protection here and there. Now it's, holy shit, we got drugs we got to sell if we want our money back. And that has been a big problem. Globalized drug trafficking, fiscal superiority, kind of touched on it. When you got poppy growing in Afghanistan, you're shipping that shit to China and Australia. You got people who get caught in like Amsterdam for like using fake passports, right? These people are everywhere. The Mexico-American drug trade and trafficking only begins to crack where they're at now. They are so much bigger than that. And it's not even just drugs. Pirating, software corruption, software stealing, all of these different things the cartel is into. Anything that they can make money on, they're into. And so, again, you're writing a dissent, you're writing an advantage. You have to think that they are a large organization that is incentivized on selling, and so maybe targeting that is a good idea. Or, hey, freeze the assets in Operation Kingpin, right? Let's just use that effectively. These are some ideas into getting that, because the whole point of this lecture is to show that the way we currently go about it, of just trying to train cops and saying that we need more protections and these people need more trainings, it's garbage. Like, that's why 2 presidents ago in Mexico's history, one of his first moves was to eliminate the Mexican, like, not the police department, but like their version of the feds. He was just like, scrap the program. And what did he do? He started paying them more. And so now they're one of the better paying jobs there. And according to most of the IR I've read, they, are pretty stable. They make a lot of money. The corruption rates in the new Mexican federal enforcement is relatively low. It's not nearly as bad as it used to be, but it's only an example that it is a money-driven motive. If somebody's going to make enough money that the cartel is not an issue for them, if they have enough to live, they probably won't go work there. And so again, DISAD, right? Your affirmative comes up and they're like, we have frozen these people's assets. These are the 4 main cartels that are currently trafficking. The act is to freeze their assets and pretty much eliminate the top 15 people of each organization. give me a good solvency argument as to why you crumble that, you should maybe come back with jobs. Like, what do you do about all these people? You know what I mean? What is the statistic of people who overdose on the drugs that are being imported versus people who are going to die because now there is a vacuum to fill? I don't know. Some of y'all are more straight up than me. I'm sure you could do that calculated logic. Something to think about. Basic operation of the cartel. So, because of this, I think cartel is obviously a good thing. Let's open this up for questions for a little bit, and then one of y'all can drive me in a new direction. Anybody have questions? Nope. All right, immigration. Let's talk about it a little more.
Actually, I have a question. So you said the cartels are a good thing because they...
It's not that they're good, it's that it's complicated.
Well, because they're building schools and they're providing infrastructure that wasn't there before and wouldn't have been... The U.S. wouldn't have given them, because they want to remain in control, keep dominance and everything else like that. But what are they teaching them in the schools? Are they teaching them anti-American sentiments? Are they teaching them, this is how you hold a gun? Or are they teaching them to be, like politicians, obviously?
No, that's the very interesting thing about the cartel and like the way that they operate. How do I put it? It's very much the logic of like, have you ever seen the documentary like Bloods and Crips Made in America? So it's very much that logic. Like, this is our community. I was one of you little kids. And a lot of them are like, I don't want to drug traffic. That wasn't the plan. I didn't grow up and dream of like running from the cops and selling heroin. Right? That's not the goal. It's just that they were very realistic about what they could do and what they couldn't do. Right? So here are some of like the more recent changes I've read. There are a lot of reports coming out of the Sinaloa Peninsula where a lot of the weed used to be grown, that they're no longer growing weed this year. That because of United States legalization processes in Mexico and Colorado, the profit margins of the Mexican government, of the Mexican cartels, has gone down so low that they're planting poppy. And so the last statement I read was that it didn't really matter that they weren't selling weed because the heroin markets have gone so high in America that they will make their profit with heroin. Some other things to think about is the role that militarizing the border plays on all of this. Right? So how much conflict are you going to get with the cartel and who is more armed? That is a legitimate question to ask yourself. Yeah, we like to say hedge yeah, fuck yeah, America, but these guys aren't like small timers. They have all of our guns. They have anti-tank, they have anti-air, they have anti-boat. There's really not something we can throw at them outside of like sending the military that is going to shock them. And so that's also a problem.
So with increased, border security, increases someone might get in trouble, so they're asking for more money. So cartels pay them more up front or give them a chance to make more money because it's harder to get in. So therefore, is that true? So is this true? So increased security at the U.S. border makes it harder to get into America.
No.
No.
And
for like regular, not for like for individuals who are just mules.
Oh, okay. Here's something I gotta explain. I think what you're asking me is the role of the cartel in immigration.
Yeah, and
right.
Because security, do people get paid more to try to get into the U.S.?
It has become a monopoly. And so in the 80s, what would happen is the cost of a coyote, and that's the name of border crossers, was about $300 to $500. No more than $1,200. You get Operation Secure Communities, Operation Wetback, Operation, all these different operations that pretty much doubled the troops on the border, right? Post 9/11, we go from 10,000 border agents to 20. And so because of that, coyotes are like almost a thing of the past. Right, the only people who have the networking ability and the resources to cross people in Mexico are cartels. So one of the things, again, advantage, militarize the border, we need to go heads up on these fools, disadvantage rape trees. Right, because people are so reliant on the cartels to cross, one of the things that has ultimately come out in like the Arizona desert is women are sexually assaulted, and then when they are sexually assaulted by these cartels, their underwear are taken and hung on trees. And it is a message to people who are crossing to remind them who runs the routes.
Yeah, to add to that point, I believe it's that 90% of women who cross border illegally will be raped. So like, the idea of like, any girl going knows you're gonna be raped. Like, how incredibly ridiculous. Like, you know you're about to sneak into the States and you know you're gonna get raped. Like, that's terrible.
Well, like a lot of the testimonies are, a lot of women will start taking birth control before they cross, under the assumptions that they will be raped.
Yeah, 'cause these trees exist. Like, Pandy saying from trees is crazy.
So like that is the reality of crossing in Mexico. There's a reason why 2 years ago, when statistics were released on immigration, immigration was at a net zero. There were as many people leaving the country as there were coming in. And that is a sharp contrast from the amount of immigration that increased from the early 90s to about the 2000s, mid 2000s. Right? There's a reason why people don't come as much anymore. This whole child immigrant thing, the reason why it's such a huge phenomenon is because we haven't had influxes of immigration. It hasn't been as nuts as Republicans will want you to think. If the definition of securing the border was, put it this way, if the definition of securing the border wasn't, let's not let one more person in, but let's try and let as many people in as go out, we would have secured the border already. So it's always a question of like, what is and is not security. And that's why I think that when you're doing your debate research, it is incredibly beneficial for you to spend a lot of time. And yeah, you're probably going to get up there and they're going to be like, you're a left-wing nut job who just like clearly believes the United States would do these atrocities. It's not far-fetched to think. It's really not that big of a stretch to think. And there are a lot of reasons why the United States would take these actions. There's a reason why Obama used his presidential right to secure the documents that were being asked for by the ATF, as opposed to having the judge file the head of the ATF in contempt. Okay, there are shit on those papers and they don't want anybody to see. And so, that's some of it. Let's see. Is there any other questions?
Briefly, when you were talking about immigration, I wrote down, did you say there was a bill that said children from non-neighboring countries won't be deported if they're found at our borders?
Yeah.
So it's only non-neighboring countries?
Yep.
So, like, say a large group of people from Guatemala are crossing through Mexico, you know, this children crisis we're having, do they get access? Because, like, they're in Mexico at the time, so it's
No,
a neighboring country?
the way the immigration works is if you are caught, they're going to ask you what country you're from.
So, yeah, if you say Guatemala or a non-neighboring country, then the children do get amnesty? No, they're allowed
It's
in?
not amnesty.
Well, not amnesty, but they're allowed in?
They're put in jail, if that's your definition of allowed.
Yeah, I just be clarifying, yeah, clarification on the bill you said, so that's how it functions?
Huh?
Like the Republican bill you said, that's how it functions, so.
Yeah. So like if I'm 12 and I cross and I get caught and I'm like, I'm from Guatemala, they can't just be like, here's a fucking airplane, here are your peanuts, see you later.
I got you, alright.
So they put them in jail?
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah.
What is the name of this bill or act?
Oh, yeah.
Migratory
And
Act.
often that's better.
No, there's not the Migratory Act. I don't remember the name. Go to the databases of The Daily Show. It's about 2 weeks ago where he does his first initial riff on this. And that's where he kind of covers like, I don't know, there are different. Like I don't know all the names of the forms, but for example, to legally immigrate to the United States, if you are just a child, that is one document. If you are a child whose parents are in the United States and you're home alone by yourself, that's another document. If you're a child whose parents are in the United States and you're at home and you're saying that your home is war-torn, that's another document. We haven't like mainstreamed this shit to be like, kids, your paper. Right? So if you're a 12-year-old, you ain't got Google in fucking Guatemala. You're lucky if you got some free Toms. Right?
For real though. Honestly.
And so those are kind of like the problems that have been striking Mexico.
So this is not related to your lecture, but what do you think about Mexico denationalizing its energy company? That's a recent reform that was passed within the last week. We're opening up a lot of the energy markets to like investment from like U.S. companies and other.
I think that on numbers and on paper, it's going to look really good when a bunch of corporations take over their energy policy. Remember, Mexico, after NAFTA, if you look at them versus Peru, them versus like other countries in Latin America, they're one of the slowest growing ones. Like, fucking Peru is like drastically outpacing Mexico in economic mobility. They also coincidentally became the #1 producers of coca. You should know that. right? Somebody comes up, well, they're Colombian, the FARC. Homie, that was early 2000s. We're in the now. Let's talk about Peru. Right? And so, I honestly think it's going to look real good on the books. I think that, like, their GDP and, like, a bunch of shit's going to soar. I just think that they kind of just end up biting back into the same problem where they don't really have control over anything. Right? Like, their tax system sucks. Their energy system sucks. Their water right system sucks. And so because of it, it just makes things more and more expensive for people, and then incentivizes them to continue to do these jobs. I don't think that, like, denationalizing it will necessarily create a boom in that sector to create enough jobs to alleviate any of this. You also have to understand that, like, the Mexican government in and of itself is a perpetrator. The Mexican government is the #1 extortionist of people in the southern part of Mexico, which means that extortion, for those of you who don't know, is like knock, 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 $20 or I'm taking you to jail. The Mexican government's #1 perpetrator of that in the southern part of Mexico. So there's a lot of trust factors that go into that. Some other things you should be researching. There are a lot of towns in Mexico that are lynching cartel members. They put up huge fucking signs that are like, no cartel. And when they find out you're a cartel, they hang your ass right by the sign as a message. The Subcomandante Marcos just stepped down. You should be researching who the new person is in charge of that group, Oaxaca. Right? Because they do a lot of internet stuff, and they are a huge part of public consciousness. Right? The Mexican government inadvertently has to deal with what they say about them. Because there's a lot of people globally who like that organization. More questions?
What is it called? Oaxaca. That's the area.
Yeah, help me out.
The organization, EZLN, stands for Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. Yes, EZLN. EZLN.
I didn't want to call them the Zapatistas because that's a political identity and not the name of the organization. Any more questions? Understand Mexican government didn't really start doing shit until 1988 about this whole problem. So, you know, we started kind of late. Right? The first president to really take action on this in 1988. And the real thing he only did was like the director of the lottery, which is not like the Super 8 in America, but pretty much controls like air trafficking routes, communication, air communication and stuff, was caught receiving money from cartel members, and he was like, "You're a fucking embarrassment, get out." That's about it. I saw a hand right there first.
If the cartels are doing so much for infrastructure, would you say that like there are parts of Mexico where they're kind of functioning with authority government?
Yes, and that's the qualm that people have, is that the Mexican government proper does not give a shit about them. And so these cartels take advantage of that, and they create infrastructure. And in creating infrastructure, they create more permanent relationships. But, all things considered, these people are assholes. Like, there's an organization called the Zetas. The Zetas were Mexican special forces trained by our lovely School of the Americas. The Zetas used to be the muscle arm for partially the Sinaloa cartel, and partially another one that escaped me because I'm pretty sure they got waxed by the U.S. government. The Gulf Cartel. And so the Zetas were like, yo, why the hell we're just beating people up for you and like you get more money than we do? We're starting our own organization. And so part of the way in which they conduct their business is one rule. We're doing mass killings, no guns. They have this thing, it's called a plancha. Plancha is translated to the word plank. It is a fraternity paddle on steroids. They hand one out to every member. They go to jails where they know their enemies are at. They kill their enemies with this said plancha, and then to add insult to injury, we'll have blood orgies with those dead bodies. Okay, that is how these people operate. So yeah, do they create infrastructure? Are there people who absolutely love Chapo and will stand by his side and started protesting the moment he got arrested? Totally. And probably in some respects, legitimately so. Is he a good man? Hell no. Hell no. More? Less? Y'all have more questions? Please come and ask. This is a very, very rough breakdown. Quasi tried to translate to debate, but
Thank you very much.